Welcome, everybody. As part of our Meet the Chief series, we are continuing now today with Chief Master Sergeant Aiello, and we're very fortunate to have him today. He was a career field manager at one point. We're going to get into that a little bit later. But just to start things off, Chief Aiello, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about where you're from and what led you to the Air Force bands.
Yeah, well, thank you, John. It's great to be on with you. It's an honor to be part of your series. I think what you're doing here is just one great thing for the Air Force and for the Air Force bands, especially, just, bridging those generations. So, but, where did it all start? I'm from Long Island, New York originally. I actually started in a junior drum and bugle corps on Long Island when I was 6 years old. They put a bugle in my hand and I made a couple of sounds out of it. And then a couple of years later, I was fortunate growing up in New York because instrumental music started in 4th grade instead of in middle school. So it was really a good chance for me to continue on. The trumpet I gravitated to the trumpet, of course, especially after playing the bugle and stuff in the drum and bugle corps. But, growing up on Long Island, I had many exposures and access to high quality music, being so close to New York. And so I had a lot of great teachers right from the start. Even in elementary school, my elementary school band director was a gigging musician, professional musician. And then that held true all the way through until I went into high school as well, So I, made it through junior high band, high school band, graduated from West Babylon Senior High School in 1980. And then, one day I was in my guidance counselor's office in high school, and she pulled out this postcard from Shenandoah College and Conservatory of Music. And she said, hey, you might want to think about this, because I was looking at colleges. Of course, I wanted to major in music. By the time I was in 7th or 8th grade, I really wanted to pursue music. It was always a passion of mine. I was a baseball player as well, so it was always that dichotomy of sports and music, But I eventually chose music and went down to Shenandoah Conservatory, which was located in Winchester, Virginia, which is 50 miles west of DC. And just fell in love with Virginia. Had a great audition down there. Also auditioned at the Hart School of Music up in Connecticut, at the University of Hartford, and Manhattan School of Music in New York too. So I had options, but decided I wanted to go away to school. I didn't want to stay in New York, and fell in love with Virginia, like I said. So off to Shenandoah Conservatory I went in 1980. Majored in music education. Got a lot of good advice from teachers, saying, if you're going to go to school for music, then get an education degree, and because a performance degree that, they were telling me I was, more of a certificate saying you can play your horn, and it's really, as you know, from being a performer yourself, it's all about the audition anyway. It's not about the piece of paper. So, majored in music education, and that was really, my first exposure to military bands was once I got to Virginia. Never ever saw a military band when I got to when I was growing up on Long Island at all. So I didn't really know about them. But being right outside of DC, up in Winchester, Virginia, I really got exposed to all the premier bands. And then the Langley Band would come up once a year with their jazz band as well. So as luck would have it, my senior year, while I was student teaching, the second semester of my senior year, an opening came up in the Langley Band, and I applied for the audition and drove down to Langley. It was about 3.5, 4 hours from where I was at school down to Langley. Passed the audition, and the rest, as I say, is history. So the Langley folks were gracious enough. They held the job for me from January until April when I graduated. And then by then, went to basic training in June. And then by middle of July of 1984, I was an airman first class with the band at Langley. So.
Now, did you study both classical and jazz, or kind of how that can, because I noticed from your resume that you did quite an extensive amount of jazz, but you were also the principal cornet in the concert band. And so was that in your background, or did you kind of learn as you went?
I was always a dual track player for sure, very versatile. Again, growing up in New York, I was always given the advice, the more you can do, the more you'll work. And so my trumpet teacher, Ira Levy from New York, he really gave me a great visual one day in a lesson when he told me, he says, I want you to think about having a switch on your lead pipe. And whatever setting you're in, if you're in a jazz setting, you switch it to jazz. If you're in a classical setting, you switch it over to classical. And so I was always dual tracked, so fundamentally sound, had a good sound as a player, and I could read really well. I wasn't a lead trumpet player by any means, more of a jazz soloist, but more of just an overall trumpet player, you know. And then when I went to college, I was able to play in all kinds of different settings, from brass quintets to pit orchestras to symphony orchestras to jazz bands to concert bands and whatnot. So that kind of prepared me for the Air Force job because of the versatility that you need as an Air Force musician, you know, moving forward. But full disclosure, you know, my true love is big band jazz. So, that's where I've always gravitated to. Like, again, more as a second chair solo player than a lead trumpet player. So.
And that might be something important that for anybody that's watching right now that may be interested in the Air Force bands or military bands in general, the more and more we go along, it becomes more and more important that you have those diverse skill sets coming in, especially for an instrument like trumpet. You know, in the past, maybe you could kind of get by with being more of a concert band trumpet or commercial trumpet. But I think nowadays it's really, really pressing that you have at least pretty strong in both. You know, like
yeah, I would totally agree, John. Definitely, you know, back when I first came in, you know, we had our set ensembles when we were 60-piece bands and 45-piece bands even, you know, where concert band was pretty much the flagship of the organization, you know. And you could get away with being a classical trumpet player back then because you could play in the concert band and you could play in the brass quintet. But now the demands on the job have changed so much in the last 20, 30 years. And you really, truly have to be able to play in all settings to be successful.
Well, tell us a little bit about the first assignment at Langley. And I know you guys did some fabulous stuff. I know you were with, I think, Colonel Graham at one point, or maybe the whole time, and did a lot of recordings, and indulge us with that.
Yeah, you know, what a great time to be at Langley, I'll tell you. I got there in summer of 1984, and I was kind of the first generation of the college-educated musician. So before that, you know, a lot of the older folks were, you know, high school trained musicians. So it was a different type of musician that the Air Force started hiring during that time. And at that time, Captain Graham, he was really my first commando. I didn't audition for him. I auditioned for Major Richard Shelton. But by the time I got to the band, he had left and Captain Graham had come on board. And, you know, the whole outlook of the band at that time and the vision that Captain Graham had was he wanted to be the premier band in the Air Force, you know. And I don't say that as a competition against the premier band in Washington, but he just wanted to be the best band that we could be. And so he hired a lot of young players right out of college that were hungry, that wanted to play, and that were ready to just take off with him. And, you know, those early days, I came in 1984. By 1985, we were recording, I mean, album after album after album. We were averaging for several years 3 to 4 recording sessions a year.
Wow.
And, you know, you want to talk about honing your skills and being confident in front of the microphone. And, you know, it was just a great, great experience, especially for a young player such as myself. And it really gave me the confidence to perform at another level than I ever dreamed of before. Because at that time, you know, when I started recording in 1984, you know, and the very first album we recorded the title was Standard Bearers of Excellence. And that was truly the motto of that band, was excellence, you know. And when we were recording on reel-to-reel tape.
Wow.
You know, and so I was very fortunate to go through the whole progression from reel-to-reel tape to recording on VHS tape, then to 8mm tape, and finally we started going to, you know, hard drives and you know, the recording process of today. So, but it was 2-track live recording. I mean, literally, if there was an edit to be done, you know, we'd stop the session and they would get the grease pencil out and snip the tape and put it together and see if it worked. And if it didn't, we would retake it. If it did work, we'd move on to the next thing. but there wasn't a lot of editing and splicing back in those days. You know, a lot of those performances were 1 or 2 takes, and that was it. So very exciting. So that was a great time. You know, I spent 5 years from 1984 to 1989 with the band at Langley. At that time, it was the Tactical Air Command Band, one of our old, you know, major commands, along with Strategic Air Command and the others. And then in 1990, you know, my Air Force mentor, Chief Master Sergeant Ron Meadows, at that time he was a senior Master Sergeant, and he took me aside, and you know, I was kind of contemplating with wanting to go to Europe, but I was really scared to leave a very comfortable, exciting situation. And he pulled me over one day and he just said, "You got to go. You'll never be the same." And so I put my volunteer statement in, and sure enough, I got the assignment to the USAFE band in 1989, and I left in January of 1990 to go to USAFE. And, another great experience. You know, I was there with the USAFE band for 4 years, and it was just a whirlwind tour. We were there when the Berlin Wall came down. We were there when Germany won the World Cup. You know, we were stationed at a very isolated air station called Aiello Air Station at the time, and we rehearsed at Glenn Miller Hall. And it was just us and the AFES warehouse management folks and some tactical warfare center that was at Aiello Air Station. That was it. So it was a small air station located between Ramstein Air Base and Kaiserslautern, the major city of Kaiserslautern. So, but talk about an experience. I mean, we hit the ground running, and I was fortunate. At the time, there was 3 of us that showed up, all trumpet players at the same time. There were 2 openings for the concert band and 1 opening for the jazz band. And so I was fortunate enough they actually held an audition, and I was fortunate enough to get the position with the jazz band, so the Ambassadors Jazz Ensemble. And so I got to play jazz full time for 4 years while I was in Europe. And you know, we toured, I think I counted it up one day. I think I toured 21 countries in 4 years. Wow. With the band there. And, you know, again, it was an exciting time. It was, you know, during Desert Storm and Desert Shield. So we got to experience the beginning of that as well. But, you know, the Berlin Wall coming down, and 3 days later, they flew us to Tempelhof Air Station to play, you know, a gig in Tempelhof to commemorate, you know, the Berlin airlift and whatnot. So, and again, just experience after experience. I could talk to you all day about, you know, the tours, you know, to Italy and Switzerland and Egypt and whatnot, you know. I highly recommend anyone who's sitting stateside right now to really think about an overseas tour, you know, sometime during their career, because you truly get to see the experience and the power of music that can influence, you know, society. So, so I spent 4 years in Europe with the USAFE band, and then actually I got to come back to Langley in 1994. By then it was the Heritage of America band, so things had changed. And I'll tell you, it was very easy to come back to the Langley area to live, but it wasn't easy to come back to the same band and work because it had changed and it wasn't what I left. So the dynamics of the band were different. Colonel Graham was still the commander when I came back. So I got to play, you know, shortly after I arrived, you know, I was playing principal trumpet again with the band. And, you know, eventually that led to me making more rank while I was at Langley. And then by the time I became a senior master sergeant, I was in charge of just the jazz ensemble, and they actually pulled me out of the concert band at that point. And then from, you know, 2009, you know, I was promoted to chief, and then had the opportunity to become the career field manager at the Pentagon, and from 2009 and finished my career in 2014 at the Pentagon, so as the career field manager.
I'd love to jump back and just kind of hit a couple, like you said, you could talk for days, I'm sure, about your experience in USAFE, but a couple highlights that I think, so maybe speak a little bit more about the Berlin Wall experience and what that kind of meant to you and what you saw in the reaction of the folks that you were playing for. And I haven't been overseas, but I've at least gotten the message from others that it, like you said, it's like nothing else, and really seeing the power of you know, America over in those countries, and 21 countries in the time you were there, and some of those countries, you know, Italy, Egypt, and etc. and just seeing firsthand kind of the power that music brings to our American military. So I
Yeah,
know
you
that
know,
I'd love to talk about the Berlin Wall, and then a couple other highlights, the military band festival in Poland that you spoke of to me earlier, and we'll talk about that, and then maybe Egypt and Italy.
yeah, for sure. You know, the Berlin trip was obviously an exciting experience. You know, the euphoria in Berlin was just amazing. But what was really amazing to me, and again, this opened up the entire Eastern Bloc countries for the U.S. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But just seeing Berlin and being in western side of Berlin, or West Germany at that time compared to East Germany, it was like looking at a colored television and looking at a black and white television. I mean, it was that stark of a difference. I mean, that contrast was amazing. And you could really see the difference in the two societies. So being part of that bridging opportunity for that city was just so exciting. And the concert there was just thousands and thousands of people. It was an outdoor concert, and just thousands of Berliners, both East and West, were there. And to see the Easterners and the Westerners coming together and to be a part of that. And I think, again, that's the power of what we do as Air Force bandsmen or airmen musicians. You know, we provide that setting to bridge those cultural differences, because music is such a non-threatening environment. And the power of music and the ability to influence hearts and minds just by communicating with music without saying a word, it just brings people closer together, and it allows to open doors and to strengthen relationships that you couldn't even dream of. You know, the tours to Italy were just amazing. You know, I think we were talking on the phone a little earlier. I was telling you how, you know, 9 o'clock concerts were supposed to start at 9, and you know, if you're in the States, you're going to start at 9 o'clock. But you know, when you're in Italy, you know, it's an Italian 9 o'clock, so it could be 9:20, it could be 9:30 by the time you actually start the concert. So we're finishing up the concert about 11:30 or 12 o'clock at night, and because we played solid 2-hour performances every night, and you know, you'd go on the road for 10 days, and then at midnight, it was time to, you know, eat and drink with the locals, whoever was sponsoring the concert that night. And so they would break out the local wines and the pasta, and we would eat till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Just, you know, and again, it's just that, it's that community coming together as nations. You know, there were no barriers, there were no boundaries of Americans and Italians. It was just people getting to know people. And even, you know, we had translators with us and stuff. I spoke Italian. Actually, I did the announcing for the band while we were in Italy as well, and with my broken Italian. But it was enough where they appreciated me trying to speak their language instead of us as Americans always expecting them to speak English to us. So, but then again, it was just the coming together and the appreciation of having us there, and them just inviting us to be there was incredible. You know, you mentioned Egypt. You know, our first tour to Egypt was a trip to Cairo to play 4th of July at the ambassador's residence in Cairo. And on that trip, we had the opportunity to play at the Cairo Opera House, which was just an unbelievable venue. One of the best concert halls I've played in my life. And again, playing American jazz in Cairo, Egypt, in the Cairo Opera House was just, again, such a conflict in your mind at first, but when the concert started, there was no conflict at all, because the Egyptian people, what we found out quickly, were the warmest, wonderful people, and appreciated everything we did while we were there as well. But we actually did a second tour to Egypt. I guess it was the following year we went back, only this time, instead of just staying in Cairo and home basing in Cairo, we actually got on a train from Cairo and then went up to Alexandria. And that was probably a once in a lifetime experience for us, because you really got to see the Egyptian countryside. It was like walking through the pages of National Geographic magazine, just to experience that and to see the the settings of these cities that were mud and more, clay, and the homes that the folks lived in and whatnot. So again, it was just an eye-opening experience, a broadening experience for us as Americans to see another culture in its home society, in its homeland, where we weren't seeing it, just in a magazine, for instance. You were living it, you were touching it, you were feeling it. So really, really just amazing experience. So, and I think you mentioned one other one. I think it was the Krakow, Poland, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a trip, again, because of the Berlin Wall coming down. Now we were touring in Poland, we were touring in Bulgaria, we were touring in East Germany and Hungary and Czechoslovakia. It wasn't Slovakia and the Czech Republic back then, it was Czechoslovakia. So, but we did a trip to Poland, to Krakow, Poland. It was a military band festival. And the military, it turned out to actually be a marching band festival, believe it or not, but they had sent the Ambassadors Jazz Ensemble down to do the gig. So it was really interesting. We were like, wow, this is going to be really interesting to see how this is all going to play out here, because, we're watching the Czech Army band on the field, and they're playing Dvorak's Symphony with marching bassoons and marching oboes right on the marching band field, on the football field. So, and talk about incredible musicianship. Oh my gosh, it was one of their premier ensembles, of course, and musicianship was just unbelievable. Just, almost intimidating to even listen to because of how good they were. So it came time for our set. So what they did was, they knew we were in a marching band and they knew we were a jazz band. So they set us up on this really big, luxurious stage down in the end zone. And, here we are now, we're Americans playing American jazz in Poland, and we have all these Eastern Bloc country bands, military bands watching us. And we were like rock stars the rest of that tour. Everybody wanted to talk to us because, Americans are playing jazz and we want to learn how to play jazz. And just for, 3 days after that, we had folks coming up to us just wanting to talk to us. And they put us up in a hotel with some of the other bands. And it was, I think we hoteled with the Russian band and the Polish band, if I remember correctly. And again, just, we were sleeping 2 to a room, where the Russian and Poland bands were sleeping 5 folks to a room the same size, just to get a feel of the differences. And they were really interested, and, talking to them, the common language for us to communicate was German. So they were able to speak German, and by us living in Germany, most of us had a decent grasp on German by then because of all the traveling we've done. And there were a couple of guys in the band that were very fluent in German. So, but the most question that was asked, the best question that was asked the whole time from all of them, they wanted to know how much money we made. And it was really interesting to just hear that, how much do you make? How much do you make? How big is your house? So, because they had these pictures in their minds of Americans and America, and then obviously for us too, we have all these generalizations of what it's like to be Russian and what is it like to be Poland. Yeah. But you know what, the common bond, they had a big party at the end of the festival. It was an outdoor, just, bonfire party. And the common bond was Polish vodka. And, once the cheering and the saluting to one another and just Prost and all of that, they were really, really just, again, you just find out people are people, no matter what culture you come from and what language you speak. Music brought us together, and some of that vodka even brought us closer together too. So lots of fun for sure.
Kind of a quick segue with that, or story with that. I study a lot about music in the prison systems as a corrective tool, and one statement was, it's hard to not like your, maybe a former gang rival or something like that when you guys are singing doo-wop together. And so, there's been some programs where they have prison choirs, and all of a sudden, these guys are getting along that maybe had all these impressions about each other. So on a different scale, maybe countries that we had impressions about, or they had impressions about us, when you guys are just having a good time, drinking some Polish vodka and playing some jazz, that all
Yeah.
goes out the window. So it's
Yeah, it really is. It really does. And again, it's about life and about living, you know. And the one thing I found out about living in Europe and working in Europe for 4 years was just the value systems are quite different. The quality of life is all about family and then just quality of life. It's not about the peripheral stuff in life, you know, job and everything. That's kind of secondary to the family and your quality of life. So that was a value actually that I brought back with me to the States, because I felt that resonated with me, how I wanted to live my life, you know, down the road, and with, you know, raising kids and with my family and stuff, you know, the importance of family. Because, you know, even my German landlords, I lived on the economy, and I had German landlords, and, you know, we'd go over to their house once a month to pay the rent, and they would, you know, they'd bring us, you know, the first year we were there, there was only we called it the rent room, because you come in the door and there was a little tiny little room in the front of the house. And then by the second year, we would get back further into their house, you know, and by the third year we were there, you know, we were drinking coffee and eating, you know, German, you know, chocolate cake with them and stuff. So, but the multi-generational family and living situation, from grandparents to parents to kids, you know. So it was, again, just a different way of living and a different value system totally, as far as quality of life goes. So.
well, let me ask you this as a segue. Now you come back to the States, and you know, you're at Langley for a little bit, and then you're going to be a CFM, which we'll get into. Kind of those values maybe that you observed and took back from Europe, how would you say those influenced your take on leadership, and kind of what made you successful becoming a CFM? And for those that don't know, the career field manager is an interview position. So you don't just get the position, you got to interview for it. And you received that position right before you got Chief Master Sergeant. So you didn't come from a band manager perspective as far as on paper. And so as soon as you hit Chief, you were, you know, right at the top as the CFM. So, but you had maybe these underpinnings of some really strong leadership abilities and things you learned. And I noticed on your resume, you had a lot of very interesting courses, for example, like the John Maxwell course, which I've taken, and I found it really helpful. But just maybe speak a little bit about what you brought back from overseas as far as those values, and what you feel made you most successful going towards that higher level leadership.
Yeah, you know, that's a great question, John. I mean, really, again, family was a big value for me. So coming back to the band at Langley, then, you know, I went over as a staff sergeant to Europe. I came back as a staff sergeant, and shortly after I got back, I was promoted to tech sergeant. So then that is the transition between supervisory positions and management positions, because I was asked to be the director of operations at Langley as a tech sergeant. So now I'm kind of in a leadership role, even as a tech sergeant. And I was always a logistics person. Those are my strengths. You know, operations, logistics. When I first came, you know, to the band, I was doing jazz band ops. And then when I came back from Germany, they put me in concert band ops. And then I was the deputy director of operations. And then I became the director of operations. So, but keep having that family value in the back of my mind always meant to me that, you know, as you know, when you're working and traveling with a band, you guys are much more than coworkers. You become a family, sometimes functional, sometimes dysfunctional. But you've got to be able to support each other and lift each other up, especially when it's time to perform. So that was one huge value that I brought back to me. The other one was hard work. And I saw that from my German landlord. You know, and he, you know, we'd call him up if we had a problem with our apartment or something, and he'd come over, and he didn't speak any English at all. And so we'd communicate with my broken German and stuff, and he would have a phrase that was called immer etwas, which translates to always something, you know. But no matter what it was, he would be on that job the minute I called him, and then he would not leave until that job was finished, you know. So I saw that German work ethic that we all, are aware of, German engineering, whatever you want to call it. So again, that work ethic was always part of my life, but it was impacted even greater coming back from Germany, taking that with me. So I always tried to be the best that I could be, whether it was musically or administratively. And that would be something that I would pass on to today's generation too, is really, you want to excel in all areas and never ever lower your standards, no matter what. Keep your standards high. And I've been told many times that my standards are too high, but those were my standards for myself as well. But I did have that as the expectations of my subordinates as well, because hard work, confidence, preparation, that all leads to success. So again, I was a logistics person for a long time in my career. And then my commander pulled me into my office, into his office one day, and he says, we need to get you, there's 3 things in the Air Force band that you need to become a senior leader. That's operations, money, and people. So I had the operations thing down. I was a director of operations. I didn't have much budget or money experience at the time. So he made me the resource advisor as a Master Sergeant when I promoted to Master Sergeant. Shortly after that, I promoted to Senior Master Sergeant and became the Superintendent of Resources. But prior to that, from going from the Director of Operations, though, I became the first sergeant for the band. And let me tell you, that was uncomfortable for me, because again, my strengths being a task execution person, operations, logistics, it didn't really, at that point in my career as a tech sergeant, it didn't matter to me. Well, the people didn't matter as much to me. It was about the getting the bus from point A to point B, or getting the equipment from point A to point B. But when I became first sergeant, that rocked my world completely, because now I had to learn the people business. And what I didn't know at the time, that my commander, Colonel Lang now at the time, knew, was that that's the secret to being a senior leader. It's all about people, because people matter. And for the first year as first sergeant, I had some hard issues to deal with within the squadron that we got through. And then from there, I was first sergeant for about 2 years, then made E8, and then became the superintendent of resources. And then after that, then it was time to promote to chief. So in April of 2009, I pinned on chief. And as you mentioned, the CFM position had come open at that time. And so there's an interview process with one of the civilians at the Pentagon who works in public affairs, because the bands obviously fall under public affairs. And so even at the Pentagon, that hierarchy is the bands fall under the Director of Air Force Public Affairs. So at the time I interviewed with a GS-15 at the Pentagon. And what they did, they always throw out, does anybody want to volunteer to interview for the position? And of course, there's nobody in their right mind who want to be the career field manager. You want to stay with the band, you want to keep playing. And so no one ever volunteered really for the position. I certainly didn't volunteer because I was a brand new chief. And, I wanted to get some experience managing a band before I managed a career field. I worked under Chief Yates. He was the chief at the time, and I was the E8 before Chief left. And so I knew how to run a band, but I never had run a band before. I was never the senior enlisted manager for the band. And so I knew about assignments, I knew about budget, I knew about operations. So I had the toolbox, but I just didn't have the experience. So the interview came and went. I think there was 3 of us during that time that interviewed around the career field, 3 different chiefs. And I was blatantly honest on my interview. And I just said, hey, they asked me if I wanted the job, and I said, no. I said, I'd much rather, manage a band first than manage a career field, And I was very honest and direct in some other answers. Well, later what I found out was Sherry Metters, who interviewed me at the Pentagon, Miss Metters, she's an honest and direct person, and she loved my honesty and directness. So by being honest and direct, I kind of won the job, actually. And so, literally promote April 1st to becoming a chief. By June 1st, I'm sitting in the chair at the Pentagon as the career field manager. So talk about a whirlwind. You know, here I am. I have 2 kids in school at the time. I have a house to sell, you know, and, you know, I've got to do this in a 7-week period, you know, to get everything going. So it was a tough time. And, you know, thankfully, the support of my wife and my family, you know, we all made it happen together, you know. But the relocation to DC was tough because, you know, DC is not a low-cost area to live either. So just finding a house that was comparable to what we had at Langley was a tough chore, you know. But I don't regret it one bit. You know, at the time, I kind of went kicking and screaming a little bit. I was kind of excited about it, but I had a lot of anxiety about it, again, being a new chief, you know. But I did have one of my mentors, Chief Ron Meadows. He told me, he says, once you're a chief, you're always a chief, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't say, nobody knows that you're a new chief when you walk around base. When you have those stripes on, you're a chief. You're not a new chief. So that gave me some confidence to move ahead and press ahead. But you know, walking into the Pentagon for the first time, that's an intimidating process, let me tell you. You know, that first day of work there. So, you know, it's the building. There's 23,000 people that work there. So it's a large building and a lot of people and a lot of officers and a lot of senior people, of course. So.
Well, speaking of that transition, we did, you know, get the pleasure of speaking on the phone earlier, and so you alluded to there were some key people that were helpful in that position, and so you call them mentors, call them allies. And I know, kind of looking through my notes, one in particular, I believe, was General Kodlik. Is that how you pronounce his name? And he was the director of the Air Force Public Affairs, and I think you said he was quite an asset to be able to you know, have as a mentor and bounce things off of, and speak maybe a little bit to him.
Sure, certainly. General Kodlik was the epitome of Air Force general officers. Just obviously, he's the director of Air Force Public Affairs at the time. And what I learned right away from him was that words matter. You know, he's the communication expert for the Air Force. He's reporting to the Secretary of the Air Force and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and he is communicating their message to the public. So what a great learning experience for me to travel with him and to be on his side and to listen to him speak and to learn how to communicate the Air Force message appropriately at the right time and at the right place. You know, and there's a phrase, it's called targeted messaging. I'm sure you guys use it even now, you know, but, you know, to be strategic about your communication, to be, you know, to targeting the right audiences. It's the same thing we do with our music and our concerts. You know, we don't take a rock band out, you know, to play a concert band job. You know, in Air Force speak, you don't use a fighter jet to use a cargo plane's job, you know, a transport job. So it was really just amazing to just be on his side, and then again, having his support too for Air Force bands, because he was a senior leader that got it. He understood the value of Air Force bands. He understood what the capability of Air Force bands could do and what we could do for the Air Force. And he was one of our largest advocates in the Pentagon when it came time for the tough and challenging meetings, you know, facing budget and force restructures and you name it. And I was just fortunate to be his subject matter expert on bands in that building. So, yep.
Let me pivot there, because that's a great point that you made about he got it. Not everybody does, but you learned earlier on, I believe with might have been Captain Graham at the time, soon to be Colonel Graham, about bringing senior leaders into our world and kind of showing what we do, so that if they didn't know before, hopefully we could kind of show them firsthand. And I know we spoke to, and you can elaborate on, literally bringing them into the band, and sitting them right in the concert band next to the players so that they really kind of immerse into that environment and see how we operate.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the one thing you have to think about as airmen musicians is the language and the mindset of senior leaders. You know, most of our senior leaders are fighter pilots or, you know, command pilots or, you know, high-level commanders. And so you have to learn how to communicate what we do, but translate it into their language. You know, we don't go on concert tours, you know, we do sorties, you know, that type of, even just minimal things like that. When you put it up on a slide, they don't understand concert tour, they understand sortie. So it was again, working with General Cod, like words matter, you know, just little differences like that, little differences between, you know, should and could, you know, because what I learned is that when you're preparing presentations for senior level leaders, the presentation or the PowerPoint has to be able to stand on its own without you briefing it. And again, and it was always 10 slides or less in those briefings. Never more than 10 slides for senior leaders because they don't have the time to shuffle through 40, 50 different slides, you know. They get the slides ahead and they, you know, they're briefed about them. And by the time you're briefing it, they've already comprehended it and you're just there if they have questions, you know. So, well, we got a little off track. I'm sorry. I got to go back. And
I was actually in my own mind, I was drawing a couple parallels. So, for example, with Chief Vasquez, he mentioned one time, I think their not band commander, but another, you know, ranking member came in, or official, I should say, came in and saw that on the calendar they had days off. And he's like, what is this days off stuff? Yeah. And so the next time he came back in, they had changed it to crew rest.
Crew rest.
And oh, I get that. I don't get these off, but I get crew rest makes sense. We need to recuperate. But so like you said, the language is very important. And the other parallel I was thinking about was when you mentioned earlier in Germany, how important it was to speak their language and not expect that they're all going to speak American. And maybe we saw that parallel with, don't expect the officers to speak speak music, but they do speak fighter pilot or whatever it may be. And so if we can bridge that gap, it's very helpful.
Yeah, it is. And again, we're talking about bringing senior leaders and educating them what Air Force Band capability is. And they're very aware of Air Force bands, obviously. If they've got a band underneath them in their command, they know what Air Force bands are, but they don't necessarily know all the capabilities that go along with Air Force bands. Because let's, you know, think about it, the majority of times they see Air Force bands are either at a function, like a promotion ceremony or something like that. So you're seeing them either in a reception situation or in a ceremonial situation, you know. So they're not necessarily seeing what Air Force bands can do as far as messaging for that command and for the Air Force, for going to places where these folks never ever see an Air Force uniform, you know, until the band gets there. Now all of a sudden the Air Force is in town. It's not just the band is in town, it's about the Air Force being in town. So it's that much broader perspective when you're talking with the senior leaders. But we used to invite them over, especially when we had a change of command or a 4-star or a 3-star or whatever. We'd bring them over to the band. And obviously, again, you know, we talked about them being pilots. And so we were like, we had the brilliant idea one day of, you know, let's put them in the cockpit. You know, they're used to flying the plane. Let's let them fly the plane. So literally, we would sit them, you know, in the trumpet section. I'd have the general sitting right next to me, or I'd put him in front of me, so he could feel, you know, and the power of the band when it's playing. He could see the conductor, what's really going on behind the scenes. So he's looking at the instrument panel now, you know, and he's looking out, you know, through the windshield into the horizon. You know, he's not looking back. He's looking forward now, sitting in the band. So, but he could feel the power of the drums, you know, he could feel the emotion and the energy of what's going on around him. And that was hugely impactful when we would do our DV visits, you know. And we continued that too. When Colonel Lang became the commander of the Air Force Band in Washington, D.C., I accompanied many senior leaders from the Pentagon over to Bolling Air Force Base to see, and feel the band. And they would do the exact same thing, and we put him in all the different ensembles. We'd sit him in the concert band, we'd sit him in the jazz band, we'd sit him in the rock band. If they had any type of musical acuity whatsoever, we'd let them, we'd hand them an instrument, we'd get that information ahead of time, and we'd have an instrument ready for them and say, hey, General, do you want to play? And General Kodlik was a guitar player. Yeah. So I brought him over, and he was one of the hugest fans of the Air Force Band, of course, in DC. And so one day I was at a meeting with General Kodlik over either at Andrews Air Force Base or at Bolling Air Force Base. And I said, General, we need to stop over at the band hall. And I had it all pre-set up and everything for him. I said, but Colonel Lang wants to talk to you for a second if you have such time. And General Kodlik always made the time for us. So we stopped by Bolling Air Force Base, and Max Impact, the rock band, was there. And because General Kodlik had told me on several occasions, I would love to play with Max Impact, And so we finally got him, and I've got the pictures too of him sitting with Max Impact and playing with them, And General Kodlik obviously was just very intimidated by the level of musicianship that was surrounding him. But at the same time, it was like putting me in an F-16 compared to, with him, playing guitar with Max Impact. So it was pretty exciting.
Speaking of F-16s, it might be kind of a diversion a little bit, but I got a great picture of you all suited up going into an F-16. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, God, what a blessing that was. I actually got to fly in an F-16 back in 1993. At the time I was in Europe. I was a staff sergeant, as I mentioned, and I had just been awarded the NCO of the Year award for the band. And during that time, incentive flights were, I wouldn't say they were popular, but they were possible. And then in the maintenance areas, that was a daily, a regular thing for the maintenance folks, crew chiefs and maintainers and whatnot, that they could get to go up in the planes that they worked on and whatnot. But for bandsmen, it was really unheard of. And my first sergeant at the time was Master Sergeant Normia Carter. And she actually became a wonderful chief as well. And I believe actually she was one of the first female regional band chiefs in our career field.
Yes,
if I remember correctly.
I'll be interviewing her, Chief Willis, who released today. That set us up, and he confirmed that she was the first female African-American chief of the regional bands. I think overall it was another female who passed away recently, but
But talk about a sharp individual, just really. And at the time she was a master sergeant and she was our first sergeant. And I inquired about it with her. I said, Sergeant Carter, I said, what would be the chance of even getting a flight? Because you had to have done something special to even be considered for the flight. And this was back in like September or something when the award came down. And, I just kind of just forgot about it. And then while I was on tour in December, I forget where we even were. I got a call from the office, and they said, hey, your flight's been approved. When you get back, you need to contact these folks and set up your egress training, and and you're ready to fly. So I had to take physical. I had to go through egress training to learn how to get out of the plane in case something happened. And then on it was the best Christmas present I had on December 22nd, 1993. I remember that date like I remember my birthday or my anniversary. It was really an amazing experience to fly, and the pilot was awesome. The weather wasn't great that day. So initially it was going to be a very kind of boring flight from his perspective, but he was able to find some blue sky that we could really have fun and play around in. And he gave me the stick and let me, fly the plane for a little bit and roll the plane over. And we did barrel rolls. And ultimately I pulled 7 Gs, I think. Wow. Yeah, it was amazing, and I am proud to say, although I did get very hot and I had to pull my visor up to get some air on my face, I did not get sick. So, but I was prepared. I had air sick bags, tucked in my waist, in my, down in my legs in my flight suit, everything. So, but it was a 45-minute flight and experience that I will never, ever forget,
Yeah.
and I was just so fortunate and blessed to be able to just, have that experience, just one of many experiences throughout my career that have just been so memorable. So.
They have, so I'm at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and we have a lot of research and development, and we performed for the unveiling of the human centrifuge that they have over in our Area B. And I don't know what, I call it the devil's spindle, because you get in that thing and it pulls, I don't know how many G's, but no pilot looks forward to that, because basically the whole idea is to test your limits.
Yeah.
how many G's you can handle as you're spinning around in this torture chamber.
Yeah, it's tough on your body. You don't realize, again, and it's just that career broadening aspect too. Getting out of your own bubble and seeing what it's like in other career fields. But I will tell you, when I went to the flight surgeon for my physical, they talked to me about handling the G's and what to do and how to push against your G suit and whatnot. And I would say I worked so hard when we were pulling those upper G's that my body hurt for 3 days after we landed, just the muscles that I was just pressing so hard against that suit. So just even more hats off to those guys who fly and do that every day and protect us the way they do. So.
Absolutely. Well, bouncing back, I wanted to make sure we got that story because it's so cool.
Yeah.
You're at, as a CFM now, what would you say as far as capstone, the biggest challenges and rewards that you faced in that role? And especially at that time, I know you faced some particular challenges of having to deal with downsizing in 2012 and just kind of the logistics of that and what kind of got you through that. And maybe, again, you had some key mentors and allies in that process that made it better than it could have been, and
yeah, you mentioned 2012. That was a strategic time in our career field for sure. I mean, it was amazing. But leading up to that, it was probably about close to 1.5 years of 2 years of work prior to that even. And again, here I am, just perspective-wise, giving you. I've been on the job about 1 year now in the Pentagon, so I'm pretty comfortable with what we're doing. We're deploying a little differently. We're changing deployments. So that was a smaller challenge, trying to just keep pace with the Air Force as they change the deployment system, how we're going to work our deployments into a new deployment system. But we had the two challenges. One was the career field restructure, which involved also the premier bands as well. Because at that time, the Air Force was all about career broadening and giving people opportunities that outside of their career fields. So, I got a call one day and said, we got to start thinking about cutting bands because we were going through a whole force reduction. It wasn't just about bands. And it was somebody outside my chain of command. So I actually had to verify who the person was, but it was somebody from the manpower world that called me and said, we're cutting the career field. We're going to downsize the career field. And I said, whoa. I said, well, first of all, who is this and who are we? Where is this information coming from? At that time I had learned to ask all the right questions anyway. And so then, I go down to General Codlick and I said, hey, General, this is, this is a phone call I just got, what's going on here? And, so we did some research and found out, what was going on. But, the short version of the story is, number one, the question was asked, if premier means one, why do we have 2 premier bands? So, and so, briefing after briefing, we would answer the mail on that question. We talked about, the level of the premier musician and the fact that the other services academies also have considered their bands at the academy's premier bands. And we were in a very good position because our academy band was the only academy band west of the Mississippi. So that gave us a whole nother region of the country that we could highlight that the other premier academy bands couldn't. But, you know, again, briefing after briefing, and then we talked about different options, because at that time, the whole developmental team, not developmental teams, but special assignments, getting out of your career field, career broadening was all part of that as well. So then from that question, you know, we spawned into all of the, you know, well, what's the difference between a premier band and a regional band? And why can't a premier bandsman, you know, go work in a regional band? And why can't a regional bandsman work in a premier band? And, you know, and again, 50 PowerPoint briefings later and many, many meetings, you know, we would address all those issues. And I thought very, very, very well, you know. So, so later on down, the options started coming to us as to what the Air Force wanted to do. But, you know, they were not credible options for our career field at all. You know, these were just basically manpower folks at lower levels, you know, basically deciding, you know, where are the assets in the career field, and what, you know, what's expendable and what's not, basically. And it came down to really, you know, when you talk about high school and school district budgets, you know, are you going to cut the football team? Or are you going to cut the band? You know, and that was the mindset. So we really worked hard. I mean, we worked hours and hours on presenting the facts as to the, you know, the justification of the Air Force bands and what we bring to the fight, and briefing after briefing after briefing. But if, you know, I'll share with you just one draconian measure that was suggested to us, you know, to give you an idea of what we were up against in that, with that challenge of force reduction at that time. You know, I got a phone call one day and basically said, well, we've decided that we're going to have, you know, 1 premier band and 5 National Guard bands, and that's it. Yeah. So, and that was one of, you know, many different calls of that draconian nature that I received. So, you know, so I guess when you ask me about the biggest challenge is, you know, figuring out a way to justify Air Force bands, to show the value of Air Force bands, again, educating senior leadership, what we bring to the fight, and making sense of our career field is from an optics standpoint. Because when you looked at our career field on the map, you know, and seeing where all the bands were, just because it made sense to us, again, some of it didn't make sense to senior leaders. And so back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so I was really proud to save what we call as many flags as we did throughout that process. You know, unfortunately, in any force reduction, something's going to happen and something's going to get cut. But, you know, it's not the first force reduction that the bands went through. You know, we had cuts before that. And we'll probably have more changes in the future too. But I was proud that we ended up carrying 10 flags, you know, 9 regional bands and 10 and our premier band at that time. You know, and I understand now the academy band's been redesignated as a premier band, which is wonderful as well. You know, at that time, it was just one of those things where that decision was kind of already in some senior leaders' minds, where, you know, when premier means 1, why do we have 2? You know, going back to that. So, but again, very proud of the team, the band team at that time at the Pentagon. You know, I was on General Colleague's right for many meetings. I can tell you one meeting I was in where, you know, I was the only enlisted person in the meeting as General Colleague's subject matter expert. And the rest of the folks in that meeting were general officers and men and women in suits, you know. So it was those kinds of high level meetings. And that's, you know, that's how high it got to making these decisions. And by the time we got to that level, we were able to show what value bands were able to bring to the Air Force, and hence the reason why we are where we are today. So, But so biggest challenge for sure. And again, that was 2.5 years, I would say, of work and challenge. But also, you know, at the end, it was reward as well. But I think the biggest reward for me was that no one in the career field, we didn't lose positions in the career field. We redistributed the positions. And that was always the goal from the beginning was, all right, we may not have as many flags, but we're going to have the same amount of people, and they might be redistributed. So unfortunately, we did lose some flags, and that was something that was pretty much out of our control. You know, those were much higher decisions. And there's a lot of people today that still, you know, obviously no one really understood the dynamics of those decisions, just basically because they weren't there, you know, and everybody has their own opinion on how it should have been handled. But I will tell you, you know, on this interview that we had the support and the, you know, the data for all of these briefings, the best people giving us the best data at the time to make good, solid, you know, decisions at that time. You know, anybody can play Monday morning quarterback and say, you know, we shouldn't have 15-piece bands, or we shouldn't have, you know, cut this band. We should have cut this band instead. And you know, honestly, even 5 years later after my retirement, you know, I think back to those days and said, you know, what, you know, is there something that could have been done different? But at that time, we really tried hard to make the best decisions for the career field. So, but it wasn't just about the career field. We had to make the best decisions for the Air Force as well. And when we're in the Air Force band career field, especially as younger airmen, you don't get to see the big picture. You see the band picture, you know. So if anybody takes anything away from this interview, it would be to broaden your perspectives when these types of things are going on, because there's so many more factors that no one is aware of when it comes down to making these kinds of decisions. So, but again, I was happy that, you know, we saved all the positions. You know, some other challenges I faced while I was at the Pentagon was joint spouse assignments, you know, military to military couples. And when I came on board as a CFM, I was determined to not split up a military to military couple. And there were some challenges along the way. I could think of at least 3 assignments right off the top where, you know, it was impossible to keep them together. And because of relationship building with our folks down at AFPC, because of relationship building with the manpower folks in the Pentagon, with the assignment folks in the Pentagon, we were able to work those out because they knew the importance of not only keeping the spouses together, but also the impact on the bands and the missions if those people would have been apart, you know, because of the specialties, whether it was a vocalist and trumpet player or a drummer and a clarinet player, whatever, it didn't matter, you know, just the impact of having a hole in one of those places because we couldn't get the other one there, you know. So, and lastly, really, I had a couple of really tough EFMP assignments too with folks. And again, that was one of my platforms as well, as take care of families. Again, you talked about value earlier and what I brought back from Germany, you know, and family was hugely important to me, you know. And so when it came time to taking care of those folks that needed the medical treatment that they needed for their dependents at certain locations, you know, how can you work those assignments to make it work for the band and make it work for the individual and make it work for the Air Force? And remember, it's always about the needs of the Air Force. And the needs of the band is secondary to the needs of the Air Force, you know. And that's a mindset that you develop, especially when you're working in the bigger, let's call it big Air Force at the Pentagon, for instance, you know, when you're around the other career fields and you're around the policymakers and, you know, all the chiefs that are my equivalents in their career fields, and they're making policy decisions, I'm making policy decisions. But to take care of those folks, because people matter and relationships matter, and we needed to take care of those special situations, you know. Unfortunately, you know, with assignments, not everybody's happy when they get assignments, you know, but most of the times I would say 90% of the assignments I made we were able to work things out to the advantage of, for the benefit of both the Air Force and the individual. So there were some times when you have non-vol assignments where it just, you have no choice. All the cards are stacked against you, and, the need is there, and and there's an overage where the person is, and, it's just the balancing act and how to make it work for the Air Force. So, but, it was a challenge. And one of the reasons why I really tried to get around to all the bands when I was the career field manager was to make myself and the position transparent. For years, when I was a younger airman, there was always this guy in the Pentagon that made people's lives miserable because they got an assignment that they didn't want, or, and so I made it a point. It took me 3 years to get around to every band, but one of the days that I would be at a band, I would sit down with any airman who wanted to talk to me about assignments and show them how the process worked. I would brief the bands how the assignments worked. So this way there was no secrets. I didn't feel, from a career field manager standpoint, that what I did as a career field manager should be a secret. They need to know what their career field manager does, and how the career field manager supports the career field and works the assignments and works the deployments and does the training initiatives and the hiring and the audition process and all of those things. All of that falls on the career field manager's shoulders and in his job jar. So it was important for me to share with those experiences with all of our airmen across the career field, traveling from, Travis to Yokota to Elmendorf to, like I said, I got to every band and to the absent band as well, because, I felt that if I was going to be deploying bands, unfortunately, I never got to deploy with a band. So when I got to the career field, it was very important for me. If I was going to be clicking the button to deploy bands, I needed to get over there to see how it was, and to see and to touch it and feel it and to see it. So, I could come back with more perspective on how to deploy our bands better, how to take care of our folks better. And, and again, as the deployment structures were changing, how can we fit our deployments into that Air Force structure, going from, what we were considered 90-day deployers at the time, and how do we take that and deploy folks for 6 months? And then we decided to split the AEF cycles up, half and half, and do, 90 days for this band, 90 days for this band, but the officer would be there for 6 months, so on and so forth. So, again, there's so many hours of thought, and we just didn't make these decisions in a vacuum on any of this. There were processes, there were many meetings, much discussion, and everything we did was a database decision. They were not emotional decisions. So, but I would tell you, even, when we were going through the force reductions, I was asked to go brief Senator Cornyn's office over on Capitol Hill. And, that was exciting for me, just to, again, educating senior leaders. And the briefing was all about what Air Force bands bring to the fight, and how we're structured, and how, what's the manning of the bands, and why do we have a band in California and not in Arizona, and, all of those questions. So it was just another chance to educate and teach the capabilities and value of Air Force bands to another senior leader. So, but it's a 3-year assignment at the Pentagon for a reason. I stayed there for 4 years because my daughter was becoming a senior in high school. And then I actually ended up spending a 5th year there because I had 1 year to go before I was coming up on high year of tenure as 30 years as a chief. So it wound up becoming a 5-year assignment out of a 3-year assignment, which was really, really, an incredible experience. And not many people in the career field get to do that position and get to do that job. So I was fortunate, I was blessed. I didn't play my trumpet for a year and a half. The first year and a half I was there, my horn stayed in its case. And then, my life got out of balance because I wasn't playing my trumpet anymore, So slowly I started playing again and started getting my life back into balance once I had a good feel of the job. And, then after that, it was just a matter of just getting out to see the folks and just taking care of the career field in the best possible way that I could.
Speaking of that, as far as, transparency, you started something you told me about, you started the shadow program. And so that'll be a great thing for those watching that maybe like me are early on in their career, or really anybody, to know about that there's opportunity to go shadow to, apprentice, if you will, the CFM position and kind of spend some time. I forget how long you said it was, maybe a few days or a week, of seeing exactly kind of what a day-to-day operations for a CFM entails. So maybe tell us a little bit about the shadow program.
Sure. Again, that was part of me trying to be transparent with the career field. And so why not bring somebody up to the Pentagon? There was nothing at all that said I couldn't do it, So, Senior Master Sergeant Garcia was my assistant career field manager at the time, and now she's become the career field manager, which I'm so proud of. But I hope she keeps that program going, because it was truly a chance. And I would talk about that program when I would go visit the bands, here I am. I said, but I invite anyone that's sitting out there I don't care if you're brand new in the band to if you're a, senior master sergeant or a chief, come to the Pentagon, spend a day or two with me. I think we did 2 days, if I remember correctly. They'd come up on one day, come in the afternoon and then come back the next day for a whole day. It was just a chance for them to see it and touch it and feel it, just like I did when I went to Absent, to see what the Absent band was all about. And it's a chance again to show them the processes and to show them that, I don't have a dartboard when it comes to assignments. And, just say, well, let's see, there's airman so-and-so, and I think we'll just throw the dart. Oh yeah, okay, he'll end up in, in Elmendorf, Alaska, No, it doesn't work like that. There's so many processes, so many safeguards in place to prevent that kind of stuff from happening. So, but they come up, I would invite anybody to come up, and we'd work it through the band chief, the regional band chief, and then we would come up for a day, and that person would literally stay on my side the whole day. They'd be with me when I answer phone calls, when I talk to the band chiefs. They could hear the conversations. They would come to meetings with me, whether it was a staff meeting with General Kodlik or whether it was a meeting with the chiefs group to work chief assignments or just anything. So they could actually just see and feel what it's like to be the career field manager for a day, and to see the amount of hours that we work as career field managers as well. I mean, I leave my house at, 6 a.m., and obviously you got the commuting thing in DC. I'd get to the Pentagon, by 7:15 or so, and then I'd be on a bus at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon and wouldn't get home until 6 o'clock at night. So, some of them were long days. Some of those days I was running to catch the 8 o'clock p.m. bus because that was the last bus out, So, but the shadow program was great. The response I had was amazing. I pretty much started averaging about one visit almost every month. So for about my last 2 years, it became very popular. And again, I had airmen first class to master sergeants coming to sit and be with me. And let me tell you, talk about career broadening and changing perspective. And that did it for everybody that came to visit me. They really got to see the inner workings of the career field and what it takes to manage the career field. So, and again, that's the kind of leader I've always wanted to be. I wanted to be transparent. I want people to understand the processes. Some information, of course, is highly, I don't want to say confidential, but highly sensitive. So there were some points where, I'd have to ask, please just, close your ears or whatever, on this. But for the most part, it's just such a valuable experience. I wish I had that opportunity when I was an airman or a staff sergeant to go see that, because then I think I would have been even better prepared for what I walked into as a career field manager as well. So.
Well, fantastic advice. As we start to bring things to a close, I always like to ask a couple things. One being a most memorable performance or experience in your time in. You have so many, so it might be hard to choose. And then the one other would be might be the same one. Most memorable funny experience or funny story during your time in.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'll tell you my F-16 flight was obviously one of the most was memorable for sure. My trip to AFCENT was another one. There are so many. I mean, it's so hard to. I would say performing at the North Sea Jazz Festival for the first time was a thrill. Even better than that, performing at the Montreux Jazz Festival for the first time. While I was in Europe, the jazz band performed 3 times at the North Sea Jazz Festival and 2 times at Montreux, and then several times at the Brussels Jazz Rally with Toots Thielmans. So again, just great opportunities there. Europe was just an amazing experience. The Egypt trips, the cross-country tour to Bulgaria, where we started out in a 5-star hotel in the capital city of Sofia. And then in the middle of the tour, we ended up in a Bulgarian army rest and retreat center where we didn't know where we were, what we were doing, and what we were eating even. We couldn't even identify what we were eating, And then to end that tour at a resort city on the Black Sea in Varna, just all that stuff was just tremendous experiences. The trips to Egypt, like I said, and the Italy tours, where we ate our way through the night. Just so many memorable experiences. Funny story, I saw that on your list that you gave me, and it really made me think of a couple of things, But one that comes to mind for sure, I was an airman at the time, and we were booked, the ceremonial band was booked to do an arrival ceremony on the flight line. So it was, it was a normal ceremony, but it was in December. It was cold. It was, even in Virginia, it gets cold in December in Virginia. Not like it does in the northern tier states by any means, but it was probably in the high 20s or low 30s. So we were going back and forth all day long, because we always in that period of time, we always dressed the same as the general officer that was presiding the ceremony. So we were back and forth all morning with the protocol office. Is the general wearing an overcoat? Is he wearing a scarf? Is he wearing gloves? Is he wearing earmuffs? So right up until like 10 minutes before we got on the bus to go over to the flight line, we were told the general is not wearing an overcoat at all. So he's not wearing gloves, he's not wearing an overcoat. So, I forgot to mention, by the way, the arrival ceremony, and this is the funny part of the story, the arrival ceremony was not for a person. It was for an aircraft. It was when the C-21 Learjet came to Langley and began to be hosted at Langley. So we actually played for a plane and not a person. So there was somebody actually driving the plane or taxiing the plane, but the arrival ceremony was for the plane. So we get to the arrival ceremony and, we're sitting on the bus and we don't have our overcoats now. We get off the bus, we get in formation, and it's a little windy too. So, the wind chill is probably down in the mid-20s now. So we get to the gig, we're set up, the official party comes out of their vehicle, and the general's got his overcoat on and his gloves and everything. And we are stark naked in our dress blues with no gloves or anything out on the flight line. So we're cold, we weren't happy that we didn't have our coats. And then the funnier part of the story is now, we're waiting for the jet to land on the runway and taxi up to us. So the jet lands on the runway and it taxis up, and we have a special song that was dedicated for the jet. And we're playing the jet and it's taxiing up and its engines are whining and whining and whining. We can't hear ourselves play. Nobody can hear anything. The wind is blowing. It's cold. We're all miserable. And that was kind of a unique experience for sure. Just something I would not want to repeat again anyway. But we did the job. We got it done. We got on the bus. We defrosted our hands, and then the day went on. Yeah. I think one other thing I could say, as far as memorable or funny or whatever, was I was, as a senior master sergeant, I guess, I was attending the Chicago Midwest Band Clinic in Chicago. So a friend of mine, Carlos Figueroa, he was a drummer at the Offit Band at the time, we went out to a jazz club downtown, and it was about 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. We're walking back, and we noticed they're filming a movie on State Street right there in Chicago, in front of the Chicago Theater. I was like, oh, this is cool. Let's check it out for a minute. So we're standing there. The next thing we know, the director is saying, you two come with me. And we got pulled into the movie. And so now, it's 1 o'clock, 2 a.m. in December in Chicago. I don't know what it is with all my stories about, you know, December and cold weather, right? So we're freezing, you know, we had come from a club, you know, having a great time. And then all of a sudden, Julia Stiles and Sean Patrick Thomas, they place right in front of us. And they start the scene, and we're rehearsing the scene. So we're like, wow, we're in trouble now because we can't just leave. We're in the scene, you know, and they're rehearsing it. So we rehearsed it. We went back and forth a couple of times, and we're walking down the L and from the train in Chicago. And we filmed the scene, and then all of a sudden, you know, they moved the scene to another block, and Carlos and I just kind of drifted off into the moonlight, you know, to get back to a hotel. But it turned out that movie was Save the Last Dance, which was a big screen movie. It came out, you know. So my wife and I, once we found out the movie, because we had to ask the other extras what movie it was that they were filming. Yeah. So about 6 months later, it came out, and my wife and I went to the theater to see it, and just to see if we actually made the editing cut or not, you know. And sure enough, we're sitting in there, and the movie's really silent, and the scene comes up where Carlos and I are walking down the steps, and my wife yells out, "There you are!" You know. So, but yeah, so just, again, just memorable times, and just, you know, and a lot of the times, as you know, even now, you know, a lot of the memories don't happen on stage, they happen off stage. Yeah. Why? Because of the people you work with, you know. And as I said earlier, you know, if I had any advice to young airmen, it would be, you know, relationships matter, people matter. And I learned that, you know, mid-career, you know, because of my strengths and everything, but I really had to learn that. And it's really just so important that, you know, mission first, but people always. So.
And I was going to ask you for closing thoughts, but that might actually be right on the money there, as far as we're in the human business in so many ways. So, like you said, we're the mission, but don't forgo the people you work with, or the people that work for you or with you, and all of that. And like you mentioned, I think very early on in the interview, that it's family, you know, sometimes sometimes functional, sometimes dysfunctional, but you're a family nonetheless. And especially when you take the stage together, you know.
Yeah, it's so true, because you don't remember the gigs as nearly as well as you remember the people after you retire. Yeah. You know, and those are the lasting relationships. And to this day, you know, I've only been retired 5 years, but, you know, I have my network, you know, even not as much in the bands anymore. I don't know as many people in the bands anymore. It's amazing how 5 years can change the career field drastically. But those of us that work together for years are lifelong friends, you know. And again, just, you know, people matter. And what I would say, you know, again, to young people is, you know, be proficient on your instrument, because that's what brings you credibility, especially at the beginning. But don't let that proficiency die off. I mean, I was always a player, always wanted to be a player, made sure I practiced, you know, when I was a senior, when I was a chief. And, you know, it's really important that you maintain your proficiencies. And then also, too, the other thing is just don't lower your standards. Like I said earlier, never lower your standards to other people's standards, you know, and then to really try to be the best you can, both musically and administratively. So.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today when this releases, and, you know, such sound advice, and, you know, great things for myself and others to look forward to, and what's a wonderful career, really, as I've learned from so many, being in so far, and also from chiefs that have been there, done that. They reflect back and say they wouldn't trade it for anything else. And so the whole concept of this series has been connecting generations, and so I thank you again for bringing that to us.
Well, thank you, John. You know, again, it's an honor to be with you today and to share my experiences to hopefully help the next generation, because we want to keep the career field strong and healthy. And anything I can do from here on out as well, I'm always happy to be there for our airmen musicians. So thanks.
Absolutely.